I'm hearing that Claude is dead. Is Claude dead?
No, Claude is certainly not dead. Maybe what you have been hearing is the footsteps of everybody shuffling over from Claude Code to Codex. I think
Why
I
are they doing
saw.
that? Like, what's going on? Why are developers pissed off at Anthropic and Claude right now?
Well, I don't know if I can put my finger on exactly what happened, but the sentiment seems to be very clear, and it seems like everybody is noticing. It could have been a Claude Code upgrade. They're constantly releasing new versions of it. It could be related to Opus 4.7, which came out recently. It could be a combination of both. But what people are noticing is that Claude has gotten stupider. So it's
Oh,
not following rules as much as it used to. Used to be very good about if you gave it guidelines of what not to do. You know, an AI is inherently going to make mistakes, and AI without context is almost useless as a long-term development tool. But that's we have solutions to that. We have our sub agents, we have our skills, we have our prompts, we have our agents.md file. These are all ways to kind of help put bumpers, to use a bowling analogy, around the lane so that it can't just spin off into the gutter. And so one of the things that people have noticed is Claude is not following those guidelines as well as it used to. My experience is it just feels like it doesn't understand what good code is. Part of developing with AI is, yes, you can move faster, but the agent kind of tends to slip into what you may have called, what you may have heard being called AI slop. Code that's overly complex, over-engineered, written for use cases that would never even be possible. And so it's a constant battle to kind of rein that in. And Claude a few months ago was doing a great job. I mean, you could teach it things and it would learn and adapt. It had some intuition about what would be good for the overall maintainability of the code base. And over the past couple of weeks, I've spent hours. It feels like I've spent hours trying to teach a toddler how to code, and it's been detrimental to moving as quickly as I once could.
yeah. And I've noticed a couple of other things. Like so I do use Claude Code, but for the most part, let's say I'm using Claude Cowork, and when I'm using Claude Cowork, I'm noticing that Claude has actually like started just burning through tokens, and it's become more verbose. I feel like it's trying to over explain itself, and then when I look at my usage, I'm just like hitting up against my limits constantly. uh and I I don't know, there seems to be a little bit of scuttlebutt on the internet about that, but have you experienced like this inflated token consumption as well?
I can't say that I have. I for sure have seen a lot of complaints around token consumption, and you can even go back to Anthropic admitting that that was the case. So, back
Yeah.
at I guess just at the end of April, they released publicly a postmortem that tried to explain some of the degradation that users had been complaining about. And one of the things that they did acknowledge is that the token consumption got out of hand as a result to some of the changes that they made. And so they gave, I think they reset everybody's token limit back, everybody on a Claude Code subscription. So yeah, like that's clearly an issue. So I have not run into the token issue myself personally. I think for two reasons. One, I'm on the highest Claude Code plan that there is, so they're pretty generous with the token usage there. And number two, I've always been very careful about how many tokens are going to be consumed when I enter into a Claude Code session. I mean, you mentioned Claude Cowork. Just out the gate, you know that if Claude is doing something graphical or with the UI, you can expect the token consumption to be higher. I
So
spend all of my AI time in a terminal. It's text-based. That's probably part of why I haven't run
So
into
I used Claude Design, which everybody was hyping up, right?
it. Mm-hmm.
And I had it go through, and we're not like I would say like a design heavy company, in terms of graphically, et cetera. Yeah, but we do have design standards and so forth. And I had Claude, Claude Design, go look at our website, check out our CSS, check out our HTML. And it did a really good job of sort of picking apart our design. I had to go through and correct it in a couple of cases, but the interface was great for that, and I was really excited with it. And then I created one presentation that was maybe 10 pages, and it ate up my tokens for a week. Like
Wow.
it just blew it out of the water, and I thought, well, this is wonderful, but one of the great advantages of using AI is you can get more done. But if I have to spend, $200 subscription in tokens on one 10-page presentation, I might not be using that feature very often.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's to be determined. I think Anthropic is not going to be fully transparent. They released a postmortem, but the reality is there may still be some issues that we are feeling the effects of in terms of token consumption. You look on Reddit, you look on YouTube. Everybody's saying the same thing. Token consumption is up. We don't know why. Could it be something that can be fixed? Maybe. Could it be a flaw in the new model? We don't know. But what I can tell you is all the people moving to Codex, they all kind of agree that it seems like GPT is either more efficient with tokens or they're being more generous right now because a lot of people are not having those same issues once they move to Codex.
So how big of a deal? So what are you doing? It sounds like you're maybe switching some of your workload over to Codex. And B, like, how big of a deal is that? How much of a disruption is that for you to have to do that as a developer and one who leads a development team?
Well, not a huge disruption. I mean, almost everything you have saved in terms of AI is in the form of markdown files. You'll find certain vendor specific differences in maybe how you label the markdown files at the top, but these are things that AI can just rewrite for you. So I would say, right now, vendor lock-in is not that tight. I think, now that Anthropic has seen everybody jump ship, you can probably expect them to find ways to make their product a bit more sticky. But as of today, it's really not a big deal. I mean, if you open up Codex, aside from a few visual differences, it feels like you are in Claude Code. Codex can read those plans that you generated with Claude Code. So I'm using both. I definitely downgraded my Claude Code subscription to offset my Codex upgrade. And as of right now, and this could change, I think one of the important things to realize is it's way too early to become loyal to one platform. I think we're going to see them, like a seesaw, go back and forth and who's on top. Maybe there'll be one clear winner eventually, but I think they're still figuring this out, as are we. But yeah, I'm using both. And as of right now, I just don't trust Claude Code with any larger refactor that requires higher level software architecting. All of that is being pushed to Codex. And, that's not to say that Codex is perfect. Codex has its issues as well. I think, part of what people are feeling is the honeymoon phase with AI might be wearing off a bit. But I can say that from my experience these past week or two, Codex is outperforming Claude. And it's interesting because they all published their benchmarks. When Opus 4.7 came out, you could see the graphs and the charts that tout how much better it is. I think there's a deep flaw in what those benchmarks are measuring. I don't think that the metrics they are taking into account are necessarily what is most important in day-to-day use when you're actually building with these tools.
Yeah, I've always had the concern that the people that are responsible for measuring the effectiveness of the tools are the ones that actually created the tools in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a strong motivation to, fudge the numbers a little bit from a financial standpoint. So I've never given much credence to them. But I also noticed, so I use Cursor as well, and especially when we're using the BMAD method, I'm using that with Cursor. And I just did the first project, BMAD project I've done in probably 6 weeks yesterday. And and it was a small project, but I noticed that it seemed to be getting like more verbose. And I used to run party mode on BMAD, and I would get, a couple of paragraphs and a few bullet points from each of the agents that was, in the party, in the meeting. But now I'm just getting pages from each of the individuals, and I wasn't, particularly complex. I mean, I was doing an online quiz. I was creating one in JavaScript. Not a big deal, not that difficult. And yeah, it integrated with the Google Cloud function and so forth, but it wasn't that involved. And I was shocked. I was shocked at the amount of output I was getting and the size of the MD files. And I need to go back and compare them to what I was before. But do you feel that the LLMs in general, as they've scaled up to the newer models, have been getting more verbose and kind of like over engineering their answers?
Over engineering for sure. It's hard because these are subjective things. These are subjective interpretations a lot of the time. That's why I think the benchmarks don't do a great job. It's hard to put your finger on what exactly the problem is. Is it outputting too much? I don't know. I think the LLMs have always had the tendency to overcomplicate things. Maybe it's gotten worse. Maybe they've gotten more verbose. But at the end of the day, all I can really say is it feels like it's gotten dumber. The reasoning capability has gone down. The ability to learn something and stick with it has gone down. Ability to remember things has gone down. And so
Wow.
you combine all of that, and that's going to have some serious effects as far as like the quality that it produces.
Yeah. So let me ask you, now we have this current crisis with Claude and Claude Code, especially because that's what we traffic in as code. Uh, what do you think is going to happen? Do you see a future where you're just like constantly switching back and forth between, Codex and I don't know, Gemini and Grok and Claude,
Mm.
or what do you think is gonna, or do you think they'll eventually figure it out and it'll be more stable?
Mm.
What's your perspective on that? Knowing that like you've been a power user for 18 months.
I can't imagine that we will always live in a world where you're constantly switching back and forth. I mean, I would use kind of an analogy like it would be crazy for you to constantly switch back and forth between project management tools. One month you're on Jira, next month you're on Linear. That's
Yeah.
just not tenable in the long run. People would not be switching back and forth between Outlook and Gmail. I just don't think that that's going to be something that people are going to want to put up with. I think the vendors themselves are going to try to find ways to lock you in even more. It'll become harder to do. My 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 prediction is that for the time being, in the short run, we need to remain nimble. You need to be very comfortable in switching back and forth, but also detecting when it's time to switch. Because if you're not really paying attention, you may not notice that your Claude has been outputting worse code. I mean, there's a lot of vibe coders out there. A lot of them don't look at the actual output. They might just keep hitting
Yeah.
enter, going into auto accept mode. And so the danger there is it might be too late before you realize there's been a degradation. So I think the best thing you can do right now, have multiple subscriptions, make sure you are paying attention so you know when something feels wrong. I think if you look online, the forums, X, Reddit, these are all good places to kind of get validation to figure out, am I going crazy, or is something changed here? As soon as I had the feeling, I start searching, and there's just validation left and right, from YouTube to X to Reddit. Everybody is saying the same thing. So that can kind of be helpful to know if it's just you and how you're using it, or if everybody is feeling it. But yeah, I think for the short run, be comfortable changing. In the long run, I don't think that will remain something that you have to do. This is still an early technology. They're going to figure it out. They're probably going to, find better QA mechanisms. They're going to find better ways to measure. They might be more careful. Everybody's in a race right now. But in the long run, I think it'll probably stabilize. I think, the when you look at the market that we have today, it could look very different 5 years from now. I mean, you have to remember, a lot of these companies are not making a profit, which is fine for a certain amount of time. But what is that going to do in the long run? I would not count Google out. Google is not necessarily, they're in a very different position from Anthropic and OpenAI. They can wait out the storm. And so
Yeah.
they may not be at the forefront today, but they've got a huge amount of resources, a huge amount of talent. And so they might just be standing back watching. I mean, they have their product, but nobody
Yeah.
thinks it's in the top rank right now. So who knows? I mean, predictions, they're hard to make, but I would say for now, I think I can be very confident in saying, in the short run, you've got to keep your options open, because a simple update could completely throw your workflow off.
All right. So one last question, scary question before we wrap up. One that maybe you can't answer, but do you think that it's possible that the LLMs have reached some sort of a limit and they're struggling to get past it and may not get past that limit? And so they've been like taking risks, and this is just one case where it's had negative consequences.
I've definitely read that. I am 100% not the right person to ask. I have a very shallow understanding about how these things work internally. But I have definitely read from people who do understand it at a high level, that there will eventually be a plateau here. This is not some sort of unbounded intelligence. I mean, there's a very technical approach that was taken in building the LLMs, and they are just pattern repeaters, basically. So I don't know. That's my answer. I don't know. We could be hitting a plateau, but I also would not discount that. I would not discount discoveries or breakthroughs in finding better ways to train these models. I mean, it all comes down to how they were trained. Will the models themselves get better? I don't know. Will they plateau? Probably. But you can always find other techniques to kind of boost efficiency, because it doesn't. I think what we've learned from Claude Code is the model is only part of the equation. The LLM is just half of the equation. The other half of the equation is what people call the harness. That's
Right.
actually, Claude Code itself, because there was that leak. We got a little sneak peek at the source code, and there's a lot in there that wraps Opus, that is what's driving, how you use it, and the output that you get.
Yeah, a lot of people were kind of accusing them of cheating, and sort of directing the the LLM itself in a way that made it look smarter, but it wasn't really getting better results. So,
Well, cheating, you can call it
what's
what you
cheating?
want. Yeah,
Yeah.
if the output is better, I personally don't care if it's because of the model or because of the
Hmm.
harness.
Yeah.
I just care that the quality is good. But I also heard that it's possible that was a marketing tactic. So
Oh,
you don't discount anything.
yeah. You just never know. Like the incentives are so big, and the amount of
Yeah,
risk in this space is huge. So it's
yeah.
hard to imagine. It's hard to understand what they're doing. They're definitely playing a game at a very high level, and we're just kind of watching the match to a certain extent. So, um, okay, well, thanks very much, William. I know you've had a busy day today, so I'll let you get back to what you're doing. But I thought it was important for us to address this particular issue. It seems to be huge, and it seems to be getting a lot of attention.